Mixed martial arts is not a sport that typically offers good endings, but even if these retirements range from heartbreaking to downright tragic, they all manage to make an impact on the supporters. Without further ado, these are some of the most heartfelt retirements in mixed martial arts history, listed in no particular order. Joanna Jenik. To kick things off, we have a very recent entry, the surprise retirement of the legendary former strawweight queen Joanna Jenik, which came after a spitting backfist knockout to Weili Zhang. After such a lengthy layoff, the vast majority of the UFC's fan base were pretty thrilled to see Joanna back in action, even if it was clear that her days in the sport were numbered. As the longtime champion of the 115-pound division, Joanna carved out the most dominant run in the weight class's history, and by the time she lost her title to Rose Namajunas, she was already a bona fide legend of the sport. But MMA rarely serves up fairy tale endings, and though the fight itself was competitive, seeing Joanna's fighting career end with her face down on the mat was not easy to watch. Still, a great career worthy of the highest praise. Chael Sonnen, undefeated, undisputed, never even lost a round, and by the time it was all said and done, the great Chael P. Sonnen finally gave his fans a glimpse behind the curtain, breaking off from his fight career with a very honest and emotional moment. Following a second-round knockout to fellow veteran Lyoto Machida, the bad guy knew there and then that his race was truly run. In the post-fight press conference, when he was asked about a promise he made to his late father that he would earn a world title and how he felt about his failure to do so, his answer was truly heartbreaking. Chael's ability to spend over a decade at the top of the sport while never breaking character is admirable, something that made this moment all the more impactful. Donald Cerrone. Another very recent retirement comes in next, the moment that saw the legendary Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone leave his gloves in the octagon following a second-round submission loss to Jim Miller. The idea of a fighter as active and as driven to compete as Cowboy retiring was always going to be tough to imagine, but until we saw it with our own eyes, it just didn't seem possible that Cerrone would ever leave. However, 3 winless years in a row saw Donald pile up the losses, going 7 fights straight without getting a victory. At 39, it was clear that Cerrone was on his way out, and when the time came to take to the mic at UFC 276, he revealed that he simply didn't love fighting anymore. With a blossoming career in the film industry now as his primary focus and his spot in the UFC Hall of Fame all but guaranteed, this legend will finally ride off in the sunset after an incredible 38 appearances in the UFC. Michael Bisping. The sad thing about Michael Bisping's retirement fight is that it really should have played out differently. Just a couple of weeks removed from his title fight loss to Georges Pierre, the Count decided to jump straight back into competition, replacing Anderson Silva in a matchup against Kelvin Gastelum. The problem? Well, Bisping had taken damage in his fight with GSP just 3 weeks earlier, and all things considered, he wasn't ready to make another walk. Gastelum managed to get the job done at the midway point of round 1, knocking out Bisping with a sharp left hand. Like Chael Sonnen, Bisping is known as a man who rarely lets his guard down, but the general vibe we got from his retirement was one of humility and acceptance. What's crazier still is that we would later learn he was fighting his last few years without the use of one of his eyes. Sure, it would have been nice to have seen him get a full camp and maybe even a homecoming show in the UK as a send-off, but by the time Michael Bisping hung up his gloves for good, his status as a legend of the sport had already been set in stone. Khabib Nurmagomedov. The great shame about Khabib Nurmagomedov's retirement was that it seemed like he was only really hitting his prime when he decided to bow out. A promise to his mother after the passing of his father allowed the Eagle one more defense of his lightweight title, a total shootout of interim champion Justin Gaethje. But once he had sealed that 29th victory, how his race was run, and once he got a hold of the microphone post-fight, he left the world stunned by announcing that he was finished. It was my last fight, and no way I'm going to come here without my father. I talked with my father, my mother, 3 days. She don't want me to fight without father, but I promise her it's going to be my last fight. A near-perfect career by any metric. Sure, it would have been great to see him fighting this next generation of 155-pound hopefuls. But if there's one thing that should be respected about Khabib's exit, it's that he did it on his own terms, not falling victim to the same grisly end that the majority of the fighters on this list did. In many ways, Khabib's retirement fight was the gold standard, a flawless win over a supremely talented opponent in defense of a UFC championship belt. And if that's the last image that we get of the Eagle, it will certainly be one to remember. Daniel Cormier. The career of Daniel Cormier was one that saw him fall short of getting the better of his 2 greatest rivals, but when you stop and think about it, the fact that he proved to be such an undeniable great in 2 divisions is truly astounding. DC's rivalries with John Jones and Stipe Miocic were among the most compelling of the era in question, And in contrast to the overwhelming majority of fighters, he didn't allow his career to fall into a long, drawn-out decline. Sure, Cormier was on the far side of 40 when he left the sport behind him, but he had also just shared the cage for a trilogy bout with the consensus divisional great Miocic. Even if Miocic was able to finish him in their second fight, the final image that we got of Daniel Cormier is one that showed him losing a competitive, unanimous decision. Not an ending that saw him go out on his shield. Ian McCall. The next one truly is one of the craziest career endings imaginable. At a certain point in time, Ian McCall was seen as one of the best flyweight fighters in the world. A guy who gave Demetrius Johnson one of the toughest bouts of his career, and just a generally strong presence within the 125-pound division. The end of both his UFC career and his fighting career as a whole was something truly bizarre. After losing a 2015 unanimous decision to John Lineker, McCall was booked unsuccessfully for 6 fights in a row. Sometimes it was opponent injuries, sometimes he himself was ill or injured, but once McCall was forced out of his final attempted UFC bout on the day of the fight itself, he promptly requested his release from the company. After the UFC agreed, Ian McCall signed a new deal with Rizin, hoping to get his career back on track. Unfortunately, things were about to go from bad to worse. In his promotional debut, which was his first fight in almost 3 years, the fight ended in less than 2 minutes when McCall suffered a deep cut. Then in his next fight, McCall would be knocked out in just 9 seconds. No doubt feeling like the universe was working against him, Ian McCall retired from the sport at the age of 34. Chuck Liddell. You know you're ready for retirement when Dana White is calling you up and practically begging you to stop fighting. What's crazy about Chuck Liddell's exit from the sport is that he actually managed to have 2 retirements, and we're not even sure which one was more upsetting. His initial UFC run ended with a streak of 3 losses, with his final defeat coming at the hands of Rich Franklin. By this time, we had seen enough from the Iceman to know he was done. And while it was certainly an unfortunate end to a great career, it still didn't compare to what would follow. 8 years later, Chuck would come out of retirement for one of the ugliest one-round fights imaginable. With Tito Ortiz across from him, the 48-year-old Liddell laced up his gloves for a fight that realistically should have never happened. And when Ortiz was able to score the first-round KO and finally get one over on his biggest rival, celebrating like he had just won UFC gold made the whole thing that much harder to watch. Merco Croop. And finally, what better way to end than with a feel-good story? Merco Croop's fighting career could have, and some might say should have, ended after the 3-fight streak of knockouts that brought his UFC run to an end. But in 2014, something very strange happened. Merco started winning. Before too long, he was riding his 7-fight streak of finishes, one that saw him win the Rise and Openweight Grand Prix. His streak would then extend to 10 straight victories when he bowed out at Bellator 216, beating Roy Nelson to retire from the sport at 45. It is unfortunate that careers don't tend to wrap up quite like Croop's did more often. His prime had taken place in the early 2000s, but he proved his fighting spirit beyond any doubt through one incredible resurgence. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.